بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله محمد وعلى آله وسلم. يسعدنا بتشريف من سعادة الرئيس التنفيذي المهندس مصطفى بن محمد المهدي حضوره لهذه الورشة الخاصة بدراسة إجمالي الناتج المحلي والاستثمار الأجنبي، كما نشكر لكم جميعا تلبية الحضور. وقبل البدء في برنامج الورشة، هناك بعض التعليمات الأمن والسلامة توجد على الجهة الخلفية مخرج للطوارئ، ومن هذا الاتجاه في حال إن شاء الله لا يكون هناك إلا خير حدث طارئ ما، ترك جميع الأمور والتوجه إلى نقاط التجمع الخاصة بذلك. بدأت الهيئة الملكية في عام 2014 بالبدء في العمل على إعداد دراسة خاصة بإجمالي الناتج المحلي والاستثمار الأجنبي لمدينتي الجبيل الصناعية ورأس الخير التعدينية. سوف نستعرض بشكل موجز أهمية هذه الدراسة ونتائجها، ثم نترك الحديث التفصيلي إلى الشريك الاستراتيجي الاستشاري شركة KPMG المشاركة معنا في إعداد هذه الدراسة. وسوف تدار هذه الورشة من قبل السيد ستيفن جوزيف. He is the workshop moderator. قبل البدء في الورشة أود أن أشكر فريق العمل في الهيئة الملكية الذي عمل بكل جهد وإخلاص على مخرجات هذه الدراسة، سواء في قطاع تطوير الاستثمار أو في قطاع الشؤون الفنية. Sorry, I will move to the channel 2 of speak about the workshop. First of all, as I mentioned, thank you everybody for accepting the invitation to be with us, and we believe you are the main user of the study output with the Royal Commission. And Royal Commission, our objective always to have a continuous and sustainable growth for our economy, for our industry, for our development, to keep our cities highly attractive for investors. And always we try to provide a full package that assure your sustainable and growth. Another issue that Royal Commission commitment to the vision objective of Kingdom 2030, especially through the NIDLIB program and National Industrial Strategy related to the nature of the business model of Jubail Industrial City and Ras Al Khair Industrial Mineral City. Annual economic analysis for our cities is a continuous process, and it will has an objective to assure that we are in a right track of alignment with the Vision 2030 and its program, and always to keep our eyes about what plan required to be provided to the industries in alignment with their requirement, and share with them also what they are looking to have in our cities, and analyze also the cost of these infrastructure to be assured that we are providing a highly attractive package. Why GDP and FDI are important as a subject? GDP and FDI, both of these two indicators, give us a right policy decision for the future strategy planning and how we overcome for any obstacles if there are. And also we plan to be within the targeted industries, how we attract it. Also, we always keep in our consideration how we utilize the existing industries, existing product from the industries that are in operation in our cities, and add more value through creating, as it's known for everybody, a value chain, and supported by the supply chain requirement. It will also help to estimate the economic impact of investment in the infrastructure, and this is one of our targets. So what we mean of this clause, that when we provide the infrastructure, we would like to provide it in an efficient way, and always keep the cost manner in our eyes, not to reduce, but to provide the best of quality to our industries. The result of the study in 2014, we reached that the GDP of our cities, I mean Jubail Industrial City and Ras Al Khair Industrial Minerals, it's reached to, in 2014, to 72.8 billion Saudi riyal, and it's represented from the total non-oil GDP of the kingdom 4.5, while in 2015 it's reached to 74 billion Saudi riyal, and it's represented from total kingdom non-oil GDP 4.2, which in other percentage, the GDP of Royal Commission, which being calculated, the manufacture industries sector represent 89%, while the other sector represent 11%. And further details will be given through our partner KPMG, more elaboration in this manner. So now I will invite Mr. Stephen Joseph to be the moderator for this workshop. And if you have any question, we will receive it after the presentation that will be given from our consultant, which is KPMG. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah. Anyway, I'm going to speak in channel 2, which is the dull business language and not the lovely poetic language of Arabic, but anyway, I apologize for that. I'll be the moderator. We're going to try to go through, just before the break, there'll be 15 minutes for questions, but if there's any questions of clarification, we can take them right away. So don't be shy to put your hand up if there's something that you need a little bit of extra explanation from. And I'll try to keep everybody on time, and we'll see how it goes. But there's some flexibility, and if there's some parts that you want a little bit more information on, that's fine. And also if you want some one-on-ones with KPMG afterwards, because you have a specific concern, we can also arrange that. So with that, I'm going to bring Tabish up, who's going to start the presentation. We also have Kil from the London office, who actually has a specialization in looking at how GDP and FDI is used in the Far East in helping achieve economic objectives. And so we have 2 KPMG members here for you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. As Steve said, I will also use rather channel 2. I'm trying to learn how to speak this beautiful language of Arabic, but maybe inshallah next time I'm here I'll speak in Arabic. Thank you. Thank you, Director Eid, for the introduction. On behalf of Royal Commission, on behalf of Mr. Mustafa Al-Mahdi, I welcome you all. Thank you for coming. We understand it's a working day. It's the first half of the day, the most productive time. We appreciate your time, and we'll try our best to make the best use of this time. Thank you. I know that we have been bothering you for last 2-3 years, but Today we want to demonstrate how your efforts will be used by Royal Commission to plan a better city which is thriving, which has more buyer of your services, which has more seller of the input factors you need, more service providers. And that's the reason why we have been trying to collect data, analyze it, and a lot of policy decisions have been taken, are supposed to be taken based on this data. So just to assure you that this data is being used, analyzed for your benefit. Before I move to agenda, just for my understanding, I'll appreciate if we can know what, show of hands, how many people come from the financial background, please? Good. Not many. How many people come from the operations background, mainly people who work in the plant or look after the plants? Good. And people from the admin, HR background? Good. So we have, and then I will assume the rest of the people are either from the planning or from the CXO side. Excellent. Thank you. So we have a good mix of people. Good. Moving to the agenda. Registration is already complete. Introduction has already been done by Director Eid. We'll start the first session. We are 5 minutes late. We'll set the objective. We'll define the objectives, what we want to achieve by the end of this workshop. It will not take more than 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. We will do a quick session on making everyone understand, have the common understanding of what do we mean by GDP, what do we mean by FDI, why it is being collected, how other countries, and also we'll share the KPMG experience, how we supported the government to make better use of these numbers and the analysis. Then we will have a small discussion on how Royal Commission plans to build upon this data. We will have the first Q&A session, maybe 15 minutes. We'll have a short break of 15 minutes after that. We'll reconvene. We will discuss the approach and methodology followed by Royal Commission for estimating GDP FDI for Jubail Industrial City and Russell Khair Industrial City. We will give you a snapshot of 2014 and 15 results. We will have the second Q&A session. Inshallah, all of this should be done before Dhuhr. We will break for Salah and then it will be followed by the lunch. First thing first, why we all are here. I will just switch on the other mic. Good. So in 2014, 15 and 16 period, I think I have been part of more than 30 meetings, meeting with the primary, secondary sector. And while everyone has been very cooperative and it also demonstrates how respected Royal Commission is and how investors look at Royal Commission, because we agree these questionnaires were very lengthy. They take maybe 2 to 3 hours of time, and you have been very cooperative. One question which no one asked was, and I can see in their eyes that they always wanted to know, why do we need this project? Yes, they comply that they understand it's government, they're asking for something, they're happy with the services and they want to support Royal Commission. But it is important to understand today, why do we need this project? Second thing, how will it help? Because everyone wants to know, how will it help me if I spend 3 hours, 4 hours of everyone's time, your finance, maybe your CXO also. So how will it help them? And why Royal Commission need all these numbers? A clear definition of GDP FDI and alignment, some people, and also not many, but very few people also thought that GDP is equivalent to revenue. So we want to clear all those doubts, give a very brief snapshot on the definitions. And lastly, alignment on next steps. And also, we want to hear from you, what are the issues you have faced, what are the concerns you have on the data being shared, and we will try our best to answer them here. And if the questions are very technical, we'll make a note of that, and within 3 to 4 working days, we'll respond to you with a clear answer. So I'll move to the first session, the second session, which is the definitions of GDP and FDI. But before we get into the definition, the first question is, why do we measure them? what is the whole reason behind measuring GDP and FDI? So reason number one, this is an established number through which you can measure the well-being of the economy. So if the GDP is going up, economy is doing well. In most cases, it also means that more jobs are being created, unemployment levels are going down. If the GDP is stagnant or going down, it means that the economy is not doing well and the unemployment is increasing. So number one, it tracks the well-being of the economy. Number two, it helps the government in defining the policies. A very good example is, and my friend Kil, who has worked from the London office, he worked with the Singaporean government for 15 years. He will discuss how Singapore used economic analysis for going downstream and developing high value adding sectors. So it helps the government in making right policy decisions. You can compare different economies by using these numbers, how vibrant the economy of different countries are, which sectors are growing, which sectors are not growing, what is the direction every country has taken for the economic development. Point number 4, it's more linked to FDI. It also shows the flow of funds moving from one country to the other, which sectors are being targeted. This is also an indicator of the economic well-being and whether a country is a magnet of investment or not. Lastly, competitor awareness. We can use these numbers to understand where foreign investors are moving, which sectors they are investing, why they are investing, and we can do further analysis. So these are the 6 key reasons or relevant factors for GDP and FDI measurement. Moving to defining what is GDP and FDI. So the first thing, what is GDP? So GDP is the measure of monetary value produced in the form of goods or services within the closed boundaries of an economy. In this case, we are talking about Jubail Industrial City and Ras Al Khair Industrial City. It is being done at the national level, but many ambitious cities which have the national mandate to look at the cities are doing it at the city level also. So it is being done in a lot of cities for Southeast Asia. It is being done in a lot of cities in Europe also at the city level. What does it include? So it includes all productive activities where a financial transaction is involved. So when you sell a service, when you buy a service, when you sell a product or you buy a product, everything is captured here. What it doesn't include? It doesn't include the services which does not include a financial transaction. So for example, if you are you're very good in fixing cars, and when you fix your own car, so it is not included in the GDP value add. Or for example, when a mother raises her son, or when a mother cooks for the house, so these activities which does not include financial transaction are not included in the GDP. Then what are the different ways of measuring GDP? So there are 3 ways of measuring GDP. Like all roads in Italy lead to Rome, all three approaches, they lead to the same number. In Saudi, Gastat and other organization, they follow production approach and income approach. In this study also, we have followed both the approaches, the production approach and the income approach. What is the difference? The difference is in the formula used, but the numbers are very close, I think up to 99% level. Production approach looks at the production output. You deduct the factors used to produce that, which is raw material, services used. You add taxes. If it's a foreign company, yes, they pay the corporate tax. And you take off the subsidies being given directly by the government. So it's important to note it's only about direct subsidies, which comes in the form of grant. We know in Jubail it might not be the case, but in some countries where there are heavy taxes, the government give it in the form of direct grant. The income approach looks at the operating profits. We add the salaries paid to the employees. We add the depreciation on the assets. We add taxes, and we take off the subsidies. So I'll give you one very good example here, very simple. So just imagine an ecosystem or a city which just has 3 companies. Company A produces product A, company 2 produces product B, and company 3 produces product 3. The company A is making money. Their operating profit is 52 million. The salary paid to the employees is 15 million. Depreciation is less than $1 million. No taxes, no subsidies. The total value add is 68 million. Similarly, company B, they are not making money. If you don't make money, you don't contribute to the economy, the value add is 0. Company 3, yes, they make loss at the operating level, but they pay salaries to the employees. They are very asset heavy, depreciation is there. No taxes, no subsidies, this is the value add. If you sum all the entities in an economy, they give you the total GDP, which is also called the sum of all value adds. So again, the assumption was these are the only 3 companies within the closed boundaries of a country. This is how GDP is calculated. Please.
How do you determine the subsidy here, for example?
So in Saudi Arabia, the definition of subsidy is direct grant. So I can give you, say, the example of the automotive sector. In automotive sector in some countries, you pay all the taxes, and then government gives you a grant in the form of direct cash to the company. So if you receive grant in the form of direct cash, it is accounted as a subsidy. Otherwise, it is not accounted as a subsidy.
We are restricting ourselves to petrochemical and metals. These are the 2 clusters over
Yeah.
there. On petrochemicals, how do you determine the subsidy?
So I will say subsidies are there at the utilities or the feedstock level, which are not accounted as subsidies from your perspective. So you will say this is the market reality of Saudi. This is not accounted as subsidy in your accounts. If you get some direct subsidy in the form of funds being transferred by the government to the companies, that will be counted as subsidy. Have I answered that question?
So, yeah, so the lease price, which one could say is subsidized, is not considered a subsidy, and the other inputs, you know, any ethane and methane.
Because this is a major contention here vis-a-vis the Western countries, because everybody thinks that Saudi Arabia subsidizes its raw materials, you know. That's what my point was.
That's right. But whether it does or it doesn't, it's not in this accounting. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we have this thing. Not working. Excellent. So let's see how some of the countries have used these numbers, these analyses to get on a path of development. I will ask Kil to share the Singaporean case study. He has worked with the Singaporean government for 15 years. Kil, please. Salim, can you hand over the mic, please? You have to.
Gil, come up here and use this mic on the top.
Hello? Okay, that works much better. Okay, so thanks for having me here. As Tabish just mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to have covered a lot of the East Asian miracle. In this case, I'll just give Singapore a sort of brief summary. So, as we all know, if you look at Singapore today, it's a high GDP per capita economy. It's got a high quality of life across any index. You look at business environment rankings, quality of life, livability indices, across every single parameter. It's a world-class city. How did it achieve this? In the 1960s, it started off effectively as a backwater. It's a famous story that the Lee Kuan Yew took a swamp and turned it into what it is today, just with some very forward-looking policies, and with the work of the private sector and government working very closely together. So they started off with a labor-intensive economy, very much making plastic flowers and umbrellas. That was the original start-off when they gained independence. Very low value added, and the entire focus was labor to try and create jobs effectively for the rising population. In the 70s, they realized that they needed to start upgrading, and this is where the real story for the Singapore success comes from. First of all, they moved into being export-orientated. I think one of the most important aspects in terms of policy for any government is to very much nurture those companies that are internationally competitive. That drives balance of payments, and it also ensures that the companies remain world-class. That process started in the 70s. Now, when they reached the 80s, the interesting thing is they followed some policies which other countries would consider controversial, but actually it worked very well for them. They tried to move up the value-added chain. So something that already started in the 70s, they accelerated. One was to strengthen the exchange rate to force the companies to become internationally competitive, which was an unusual but highly effective policy that they covered. They also carried on their policy of trying to attract FDI. And the reason for this is it's a very small country, very small population. They needed to get the skills and the investment from foreign companies. And that was very much driven from the 70s, but definitely into the 80s. This has basically been then their policy since then. Remain world-class, remain globally competitive, attract FDI, so that the GDP per capita and the value-added chain carries on being enhanced. Once they reached the 1990s and 2000s, then they started realizing they needed more of a dual policy. As they moved up the value-added, the number of jobs created in the manufacturing of the value-added sector are much lower than when you're labor-intensive. So they realized that they need a combination of services and manufacturing. And what they've done in a clever manner is build financial services. Those financial services help the manufacturing sector. The world-class manufacturing companies they have no longer create the jobs. They're very capital intensive. But the sheer size of manufacturing, per factory, not many employees, but the fact that they've carried on in manufacturing has very much made a difference. And the fact that there's a unison of manufacturers and financial services has helped to drive them as a hub. It's helped them to remain competitive. On top of that, we've got the knowledge economy. I don't know if you're aware of the details here, but they continue to attract small companies and big companies from abroad, remaining a hub for Southeast Asia. I think that's something Saudi Arabia can definitely do. It's actually the biggest economy in this region. And if there's one a big advantage over Singapore is it's got world-class companies, it's got the capability, it's a question of just nurturing that. And I think those are the sort of the big issues. Within this context, I've given you what's on the slide. I think one of the big issues is what's left out. If you look at FDI as a percentage of GDP in Singapore, it's among the highest in the world. But actually, a significant part of the investment, so one of the ratios I've looked at over the years across countries is what percentage of standard investment is made up from FDI. Singapore, again, tops most charts. And the money's coming in because they have followed policies of transparency. They've ensured that they think ahead in terms of infrastructure. And actually that hits on the point that Tabish made. One of the reasons we're doing this is to make sure that we understand what the needs of the companies are going forward. And if we have an idea of what companies need, based on these kind of surveys, then we're forward thinking in terms of policy, in terms of, as actually Stephen mentioned earlier when we were chatting, if we know how many roads are needed, how much power is needed, how much water supply is needed from this kind of activity in terms of this research, then 10 years from now, the city won't be thinking we're falling behind. And that's very much the model that Singapore has followed. They always try to think ahead. They work with the private sector to say, what are your needs now? What are your needs in the future? And that is what has made them successful continuously. I think one thing I will mention that definitely people aren't aware of, that Singapore is considered now a services economy, but most people are not aware that 5% of GDP comes from munitions. It's actually quite a big, small, light tank, combat vehicle, and general munitions manufacturer. It's made a lot of activity in there for decades, and it's just one of those stories that is a side issue. And they've done that through foreign skills, they've done it through FDI, but also indigenous technologies, which I think in the current environment, when under Vision 2030, that's very important, given the government's trying to focus on those areas as well. And also actually, and within the context of Saudi Arabia, one interesting thing is also the combination of services and manufacturing has enabled Singapore, with no oil, to be one of the biggest oil rig maintenance countries in the world. And they have a natural advantage of ports, and obviously oil rigs offshore works in that sense. But there's no reason that can't be done in Saudi Arabia, which is actually an oil producer. But Singapore actually has quite a big manufacturing and maintenance services industry for oil. And I would just sort of leave you with the idea that, just remember that manufacturing that's done here, working with services, is sort of a good combination. In the future, when you're looking at the success of manufacturing, already we're seeing this in Germany, UK, they've been aware of this for a long time. If you can get services to work with manufacturing, a lot of the value added and a lot of the profits will come from the contracts you sign with the manufacturing side. So I think that's a sort of general combination of what's happening in Singapore and a whirlwind tour of some other places. So,
Perfect.
shall I give it back to you guys?
Just a couple of policy points on Singapore. I mean, we benchmark ourselves in Jubail against Singapore, Antwerp, Houston. These are our competitors as petrochemical hubs. If we got up to Singapore's level of business and financial services, that's an extra 18,600 jobs here in Jubail. So one of the reasons we do these benchmarks is to figure out what our policy can actually achieve. If we benchmark ourselves against Houston in terms of business and financial services, perfect. But if we benchmarked ourselves against Houston business and financial services, and those of you who know Houston exports an awful lot of engineering advice, we'd have an additional 46,000 jobs. So these benchmarks are important, and looking at the success and how we can apply them to Jubail is part of the results that you've very kindly helped us achieve. I know our CEO wishes to come up and give a message to yourselves.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Sabah al-khair. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to really thank you all for accepting the invitation of the Royal Commission and taking the time and joining the team today for this exciting session and workshop. I would like also to thank our partner, KPMG, for their work. They have been very supportive to this initiative since years, and I attended 2 sessions with them before, and they were very informative. What I want really to leave you with before I go is 3 things. The example that was shared with us regarding Singapore, I think it's really a great example, great business case. Jubail, 40 years is not the same in the future. So we have to really think about a different Jubail in the future. Industry is part of it, but definitely there were some areas that grew with Jubail over the last 40 years. Part of that is some competitive advantage in tourism. You know, the city is very attractive to other investments. So I would like to really see the contribution not only of the industry, but also the commercial sector, how the commercial sector is really growing, and what are the policies that need to be also revised or changed in order to sustain that growth. The second message is building capabilities when it comes to some sophisticated studies like the GDP FDI. We want really to make sure that within the Royal Commission, we will continue to build our internal capabilities that can really have this exercise, not a seasonal stuff to do, but it's really continuous exercise that we do every day because it's really important to our future. Number 3 is to make sure that you, as partner for us industry here, are up to speed with respect to the results. What we are showing maybe today is a retrospective analysis of 14, 15, 16 maybe, and 17, 2000 until 2017, 16, up to 15. Yeah. And maybe we can really develop some instrument that can make us really able to extrapolate for the future and develop something that can show us, how the future will look like based on our performance in the past years. So this is an objective that I would like to really see coming out of this exercise, not only analyzing the history, but also projecting the future and how the future can really help us in better planning and better policy, management. So 3 things. Jubail is not only industry. We want to build our capabilities both in the Royal Commission as well as in the partners here in the Jubail. And 3rd, it's all about the future. So whatever study we do in the past, if it is not helping us to really shape and craft the future, it will be some extra thing that we do, but we want really to make the best out of this investment. The Royal Commission investing in this study, great resources, great financial also resources. So we want really to make sure you as partners taking the time today and sitting with us are making the best out of it. So please do challenge us and please do contribute with the best that you can do. Again, I thank you and I wish inshallah you will have very successful workshop today inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Okay, and actually on the 3rd point, it is in the contract that they should use this for some scenario modeling and to show what different futures might have for us depending on what strategy we pursue to find out which is the best for us. I don't know if Tabish, you just want to briefly mention the 3 scenarios that you did explore, but there'll be many more. This is just the beginning of the process that our CEO just mentioned.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. So Steve, in the next section we talk about the scenarios, how they are being used, how policy is being framed with those scenarios. So we have a specific session on that.
Perfect.
Moving to the other case study, we are working with the Indonesian government, where one of the state-owned companies was thinking about setting up, building a petrochemical complex. So it was a huge investment, around $10 billion. And for this investment, they were asking for different types of incentives. They wanted exemption on import duties, for the fuel import, within the petrochemical complex, whatever they was importing. They want the waiver on the income tax. They wanted a performance guarantee from the government. And lastly, they wanted government support on the infrastructure, like we have in Jubail. What KPMG was supposed to do, we were supposed to do an economic analysis and tell them whether it makes sense to incentivize this industry or not. And this was done based on the economic cost and benefit, and we told the government that this is the return, the economic return the government will get if we incentivize this industry. So we covered the construction phase, the operation phase. We looked at the linkages of this industry, both upstream, downstream. We estimated what is the direct, indirect, and induced impacts. And then we told what will be the contribution of this industry to the Indonesian economy. And then we told them whether it makes sense to incentivize it or not to incentivize it. This is something very similar to what has happened in Jubail and what's happening in Jubail as we are talking for other industries.
I mean, Jubail is a very different structure from many other industrial parks in the world. I mean, normally an industrial park expands lot by lot or project by project. We have the ability to bundle a whole bunch of projects together into a very large expansion, but we need the data to justify why we should do that. You don't have the individual data from each company that's ever going to go there. You have to look very far ahead. We need this data. Also, nationally, we're being required to do what's called a cost-benefit analysis for our infrastructure spending. All Saudi government entities have to do this. You have to have this data. on jobs and GDP to be able to talk about the costs and benefits of doing our infrastructure expansions. So the work that you shared with us is really useful. It's absolutely essential for us to move forward, to bid for the funds so that we expand our infrastructure, make sure you're well served, and the infrastructure is always there ahead of when you need to open a plant.
Thank you, Steve. I'll talk about more on this topic when we move to the next section. The third example, we were engaged by a city government in one of the Southeast Asian nations. They were updating their master plan for next decades, multiple decades, I think for 3 decades. And they wanted us to tell them what are the sectors they should consider, what will be the typical investment required, and what will be the impact of these industries on the economy. So we did the competitor analysis, we looked at the wages, we looked at the utility cost, we looked at what kind of skill is available in that city and the surrounding areas. We told them that these are the 7-8 sectors you should target. And to bring these 7-8 sectors to the critical mass, they are looking at around $80 billion of investment from the private sector. This investment can come either from the existing industries there, some of the big corporate houses, or it can be funded by the banks or by the government, or it has to come in the form of the FDI. And then our job was to tell them what are the policy implications they need to have in place, or decisions they need to make to ensure that this happens on the ground. So job number 1, tell them what is the impact. $80 billion of investment will give them $160 billion of GDP impact every year. So this is the kind of multiplier we're talking about. $80 billion investment gives them $160 billion of GDP impact. Almost 800,000 jobs. 800,000 jobs. So this is the kind of impact we're talking about over the next 20, 30 years. This is not for Jubail. Please note, this is for a city which is confidential in Southeast Asia. How all these things are converted into policy. So the first thing, the economy was not open. They were not open for the foreign ownership. So we said, ease the restriction on the foreign ownership. Open the market. Run a program for attracting industries. Reach out to the investors. Tell them how great you are. Develop the infrastructure. If you don't have the infrastructure, they might come to the city, but once they visit the city, they will realize it is not the place where they want to invest. So these are the enablers. Enabler is regulations, enablers are marketing, enablers are infrastructure. Then get into execution. Get the low value adding industry or the medium value adding industry. Once you have them in place, then move to the services around them. What are the services around core manufacturing? The services are you need very strong financial sector, you need healthcare, you need aviation cluster, you need some high-tech manufacturing also, building upon basic manufacturing. You need to upgrade your infrastructure, so we advise them to build airport logistics park. And then once these enablers are in place, then go full throttle. This is the time to fly now. Get into high-tech industries, semiconductor manufacturing, R&D in biotechnology. So this is how a very simple collection of data on GDP FDI resulted into full-blown policy decisions. We spoke about GDP, FDI, just a simple definition. And so FDI talks about the investment from one geography to the other geography. It can happen in the form of equity, joint venture, strategic holding. IMF recognizes an investment of 10% or more as substantial, which can be counted as FDI. Because at 10% you have the voting rights, you can influence the direction of the firm. So that's why IMF recognizes only 10% or more. You can measure FDI in 2 ways, FDI flow. So FDI flow talks about the direction of investment happening from one country to the other. It is called inflow, outflow, and net. Second way is FDI stock. So we know SABIC was built 30 years ago. There were different JVs. At the beginning, the invested capital by a foreign investor, say, was 5 billion. What is the value of that investment now? So this is the stock value. So the current value of the foreign investment. Why do we need foreign investment?
and specifically why Saudi or Jubail needs foreign investment. Typically, you need foreign investments for 4 things. Typically, access to technology, access to markets, access to skills, and access to capital. In case of Saudi, I think one of the biggest advantage of Saudi is the capital. We don't need FDI for this, or this is the least priority. The most important thing is the technology. The second most important thing is the market, and I will put them at the same level, and the skills. So these are the key 3 reasons why we need FDI. We want investors to make money. We are perfectly fine, they repatriate the profits, they have made multiples of the investments made. We want to appreciate that. In fact, we want to make even more money. We want them to make money. But we want them to invest in technology, give us access to markets where Saudi is not known or does not have the access, and we want the access to the skills. We have excellent examples already in Jubail. You will see the numbers also on FDI later, but key thing is it's all about technology, skills and markets, least about capital. We want foreign investors to make money. Thank you. So in the last session, we covered the definition of GDP FDI. We spoke about the Singaporean example. We spoke about the Indonesian example. We spoke about the South Asian city example. We heard wonderful point from the CEO. Steve also explained how Royal Commission is looking at these numbers. Now, we will talk about how Royal Commission will derive policies from GDP and FDI. So these were generic things, definition, examples. Now let's look at Royal Commission. Why Royal Commission needs all these numbers? 5 reasons. Number 1, we want to establish linkages with different industries. So we know that we have crude, it is refined, it goes to crackers, it produces basic chemicals, specialized chemicals, then it has to go to some form in the finished form. It can be cars, it can be pharma, it can be consumer durables. We want to understand these linkages. Why? Because your suppliers, suppose you buy some chemical from China or Germany, there is a potential of bringing that supplier to Saudi, and we want to know that number. We want to know what is the total import of different materials to Jubail or Ras Al Khair, and that's an opportunity for us to localize. We want to find buyers for you. We want to see which are the products you are manufacturing, what is your capacity, is your capacity fully utilized or not? If not, there is a potential opportunity to bring a buyer. For example, if you are a manufacturer of ABS or polyurethane, if we have the car industry, it will need foam, it will need dashboards, which is the buyer of these sort of chemicals. So we need these linkages. Number 2, Royal Commission has spent in last 4 decades, maybe hundreds of billions of riyals. Government has every right to ask the justification of this investment. And we know that the proof of the pudding is in eating. You can see Royal Commission, it is one of the best cities in the kingdom. But they want to know how many jobs we have created. How are we contributing to the economy? Are these numbers big enough to justify this massive investment or not? Number 3, we need inputs on manpower. Why? Because this manpower has to be trained, first of all. So if you are growing by 4%, your manpower is growing by 6%. You have other industries coming in. Jubail will have 100,000 more people in 10 years. What does it mean for Jubail? You need to train these people. Perhaps the capacity of Jubail City College and Jubail Industrial College and the universities have to go up. These people will be married, they will have families. So they will have kids. These kids have to study somewhere. They will need healthcare services. They will need park spaces, public spaces. It will have an impact on the infrastructure on the urban side and the industrial side. So do we have roads wide enough to incorporate for the inbound, outbound logistics? Do we have capacities in the port? Do we have the rail line? Do we need the rail line? And if we need the rail line, what should be the capacity of the rail line? We need all these inputs. And all these things come from linkages, inputs on the manpower, and all these things go to the master plan. So it sounds a very engineering sort of a thing, but we spoke about the South Asian example. It's not engineering. It's economics and industrial development happening on the ground, which influences the master plan. And if we don't have these numbers, we will end up building a chaotic city. where you don't have enough capacity to support the investors. The roads will be crowded. Your supply chains will be disrupted. There will be jams of trucks. If we know the right output, right input, we can build the infrastructure in advance. And lastly, all these analyses we also do to understand whether this is the right direction, whether this is an investment worth making, whether this industry will give us the right kind of return, or going in this direction where we need $100 billion of investment. We should rather go in this direction, which will give us twice the more jobs and twice the more value add. So it also helps us in doing the what if analysis. So this is an insider information, how Royal Commission plans. So Royal Commission has 6-step process of planning. Number 1, the long-term strategy should be in place. Number 2, define different scenarios. What if this doesn't happen and this happens? Based on those scenarios, define the industrial model and the economic model. Look at the impact of these scenarios and model on different sectors. And all these sectors will define the city portfolio. What city portfolio means? The land planning, the industrial planning, utilities, roads, rails, ports, everything. And what is the impact of all these things on the economy? So this is the Royal Commission blueprint of planning. I will give you a very good example. So Royal Commission has been discussing which direction they should go. And this is illustrative, so don't think that this is what's happening at Royal Commission. This is just for illustration. We have an excellent raw material industry. We have refined products. In many cases, we have upstream chemicals. We have aluminium in Ras Al Khair. We have almost all types of plastics from SABIC, Tasni, PCC, a lot of secondary industries also, compounders. But we are here right now. We don't have much of activities happening in the form of finished products. Now the question is, how can we go downstream? And the ultimate goal is aero and defense. Kil mentioned about Singapore, how ammunition and defense industry contributes 5% to Singaporean economy. This is the end state we want to achieve. But it is not possible to leapfrog from here to here. So what are the midterm activities we need to do? We need to focus on downstream chemicals, some of the heavy manufacturing activities like shipbuilding, automotive manufacturing. So let's talk about the automotive in details. How will Royal Commission look at automotive industry and why your inputs are important? So going back to the first slide, 6 stages. Number 1 is strategy. The strategy is to go downstream. Number 2, what are the scenarios? I spoke about the automotive example. So the automotive example said, look at different scenarios. So there are 3 independent factors which can impact the production of car. The total size of the production, the localization of the value chain, and the location of the cluster. So the cluster can be anywhere in Riyadh or anywhere in Saudi. What will be the impact on Jubail? And if it is in Jubail, and if the production changes, the localization changes, what will be the impact on the existing industries, infrastructure, and economy? So then we do the scenario analysis. Then we look at the value chain to build the industrial model. So this is the automotive value chain. This is a real automotive value chain. So let's look from right to left. We see that you need the OEMs. To bring these OEMs, you need the tier suppliers who will supply to the OEM. We don't have any of them. We need to bring them. To bring them, we need specialized raw material. We have raw material coming from Ma'aden, from SABIC, from PCC, Ingenia. Steel we need to bring. We don't have steel. We will talk about that. And these are the base form of the raw material. So if you see, this is going from upstream to downstream. Another important thing is some of these raw materials have application in the adjacent industry also. So like polyurethane in the compounded form can also go to the furniture industry. The steel can also go to home appliances industry. The copper and other components, those wires and those alloys, can go to electrical industry. The steel can go to shipbuilding industry. So there are adjacent uses also. And that we will talk about that also. Thank you. So what we do at Royal Commission, we looked at the finished product. The finished product is a car. The 75% of the cost of the car is distributed across these 5 categories: body and exterior, interior, axle brake, suspension, general parts. The most important thing, if you notice, that all of these things are either made up of metal or plastics. And Jubail already has all these raw material in some form. So we assume that we have industry, we took different scenarios. In the base scenario, we said, if we have automotive industry, we will need more than $1 billion worth of steel every year. We'll need plastics more than $2 billion worth of every year. Aluminium more than around almost $1 billion of aluminium every year. Now the question is, if we need these raw materials, do we have these raw materials or not? Because raw material is the whole reason why this industry is being considered. So we looked at raw material in the very detailed form. And all these numbers are coming from this study, GDP. We saw steel. We have Hadid, yes, but they don't have rolling mills. So we will need a steel plant which can supply to the automotive industry. Aluminium, yes, we have Ma'aden. Ma'aden already supplies to Germany and US for the car industry. And those cars come to Saudi. It is such a waste of resources. So you send aluminium from rolls from Ma'aden to Germany. You sell ABS, EPDM, and all those chemicals from SABIC to Germany. Germany produces the car, and the car is shipped to Saudi. So just imagine if you could have had an automotive cluster in Saudi. All these things can be localized, and the things can be more efficient. Glass, yes, we have Saudi Gajan. There's another company also. Polypropylene, yes, we have already. Ravago is there. Ravago said that they can compound. They already can compound, and they're selling already to some of the chemical companies. ABS, PU. So you see that whether you have this product or not, we know through these studies. We know what is the capacity utilization. We know if you have excess capacity or not. We also met and spoke to some of them. The key conclusion, you need a steel manufacturer. Hadid does not have rolling mills. You need the system house for polyurethane. We don't have the system house. We spoke to Sadara. They said, yes, they need system house. The key message is, if we can bring the automotive cluster, this is the impact in ton on the industry, on the local industry. How does it impact everything on the ground? So we have, and again, all illustrative, we have metals, component manufacturer, and the supply chain in RIC. We have tiers and OEMs in Jubail. We have plastic coming from the Plaskim Park. It will come by trucks. In some form, it might also come by train. The question is, do we have enough infrastructure to support automotive cluster? What is the impact of your movement of goods? Whether your movement of goods will be impacted by this or not. If it is, then we need to plan for the infrastructure upgrade. So these sort of questions are again answered by your numbers. So we impose all these scenarios on your numbers and see whether there is a sufficient capacity or not. So I can give you an example. If we go with this example, by 2040, some of the interlinkages will be overcrowded. So we need to expand that. So if we would not have had your numbers, we would not know that we will need expansion at some of the linkages. Lastly, last slide on this, the socio-economic impact. So what will be the impact of automotive cluster on the economy? We are talking about almost 18 billion riyals of GDP increase and almost 25,000 jobs. This is important to justify. We are talking about billions of dollars of infrastructure investment, whether this is worth it. So all these justifications come from the GDP FDI numbers. Once we have all these things, then Jubail is also responsible for residential. It is responsible for primary, secondary, even higher education. It is responsible for healthcare. It is responsible for public spaces. And all these numbers come from economic analysis. It impacts the master plan. And that's why we keep on asking for these numbers. Steve, you want to add something on the policy side?
Babish,
We're almost exactly on time. So we're imitating the German car industry that everything has to be exactly on time. So we've only got a few more minutes. I don't know if Tabish, you want to go straight into questions and let's see.
Yeah. So we go to Q&A in that case.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
just
let's
just
start
one common note. How it's this study and these indicators are very important. From the information that we get it from you, as you know now in Jubail we have 12 crackers. And we came to know that these 12 crackers need some specialty chemicals. If these chemicals does not reach on time for these crackers will be shut down, which is mainly anti-coke chemicals. So again, we build a strategy how we could localize these chemicals and to be manufactured in Jubail and serve the industry, because we would like to avoid any critical situation and global logistic. If the global logistic something being happen and this chemical it's not being reached on time or it's available in the inventory, it means the crackers will be shut down. So again, this is to show how the study and the information we get from you are very, very important and essential for our future planning and putting multi-strategies and keeping our industry growth and sustain. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah. Questions?
So if you can just switch to the
One
next
more
slide.
slides.
Yeah. So we are on time.
I have a question for this gentleman from Singapore. Is there any correlation you have found in Singapore GDP versus FDI? I mean, the graph was very impressive, but what is the FDI on the same graph? Do you have?
That's interesting because depending on how you analyze this, one of the things that, one of the closest economies that people consider similar to Singapore is Ireland. And both of them saw exactly the same situation. Very rapid economic growth, very rapid GDP per capita growth, and both of them had very rapid FDI. Now the issue there is, was FDI attracted by very good business environments and very good policies, which anyway would have driven economic growth, or did GDP growth attract FDI? Now, if you look at the reasons for FDI, which Tabish has mentioned, there are other factors depending on the economies. So regardless of the business environment in China, people go there because there's a market and it was very cheap to manufacture there. And that's why you've got the global export powerhouse story. People have not gone to places like Singapore and Ireland as FDI investors because of market size. They've gone for other reasons. So what are the reasons? That goes back to the business environment and the hub status. And what both of them have in common, bringing back Ireland, is low tax environment, good infrastructure, open economies. I would say that the link, therefore, is that they created a very good business environment which attracted FDI, which then created a virtuous cycle that pushed economic growth. And that came from FDI, but it's very difficult to create a causality. I think they did a good job in general with consistent policies. But FDI is attracted by consistent policies and certainty. And so is domestic business.
In the specific case of Jubail, as you know, Jubail was built on the basis of joint ventures. So I think KPMG have calculated roughly we've got about 25% foreign ownership of all the Jubail industries combined. And that's quite high. But it's in some ways a sweet spot. A lot of those JV plants are all world scale. They're all the best technology, the best environmental standards. They come from the JV partners. And they're constantly updated because of an active, dynamic JV partner who's obviously looking at what is the most efficient way and the most environmentally best way to run that plant. So we're not locked in time in technology. We're constantly being upgraded because of that. Plus the offtake agreements, which are usually part of these JVs, also make sure we've got access to the global markets. When you don't have a commodity chemical to sell, but you have some form of downstream chemical, you need those offtake agreements because they're very dynamic and very knowledge intensive in the way of selling those products. So we've benefited not just from the skills, and certainly not the capital. The capital, as Tavish rightly says, is the least important thing for Saudi Arabia. We have managed to get some of the world's leading companies in Jubail. If you look at a map of the global ownership and include some of the industries which are knocking on the door, every single corner of the planet has a stake in Jubail. It's really quite remarkable that way. So the FDI has created a global hub of petrochemicals, which in volume is the largest hub, and hopefully in value we can grow to be the largest hub in terms of value as well.
Actually, FDI is supporting us in attracting through the partnership or these FDI that invest in the kingdom to attract more investment who are working with them. I will give you a clear example. Now, as you know, Sadara is in operation, and they introduce some chemicals that it's not been previously manufactured, and we move forward with them to attract more investment, relying on their products, especially PO and PO. These chemicals previously as a feedstock does not exist, but with their partnership between Aramco and Dow, they come to produce these chemicals which will again complete the value chain of the industries for an important sector, which is, let us say, chemicals for oil well drillings that utilizing PO and EO. So therefore we believe FDI it's playing a major role in expanding the investment opportunities for the industry, which obviously will add to the economy GDP.
Can I just actually add there? I answered that, answered you in a macroeconomics way, which is how I'm trained. But I've just been given a reminder here that if you look at Singapore, the two most successful parts of the economy are pharma. That's sort of one of the key industries in terms of exports and a reputation. And the other one is financial services. If you break down pharma, basically look at every single name there. It's European. All the European pharma companies are based in Singapore. It's driven a huge amount of their exports and GDP. The other side, in terms of job creation, financial services. If you look at the commercial banks, Singaporean commercial banks, yes, they're domestic. But actually, the way they've created themselves as an international hub is through foreign companies, foreign banks and wealth funds and insurance companies. So that's
perfect. Yeah, but I just wanted to point out to the gentleman from RC's his question, his explanation. We have a counter example of for example, SABIC. They have disinvested in Sadaf, for example. They have sold off their shares. I mean, Sadaf has bought their, Sadaf shares have been, Shell's shares have been bought. So that's a very huge, actually, reverse FDI, actually.
Yeah, but again, now we are in discussion with the foreign partner who been sell his percentage or his equity to SABIC to have a new strategic investment, which means when they take a decision to turn over their investment to SABIC, they have already a plan for expanding their business in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for other strategic sector, which is, it's not a secret, catalyst. It's an important ingredient for our industries. If the catalyst is, and they know there is a market, not only major of it, it's in the kingdom, but within the whole GCC region, they need to expand their business. So I agree with you, in some cases, it's become reverse, but they always, these strategic partners, put in their plan to keep existing an investment in strategic location. But I agree with you 100%, but it's not that mean it's a negative strategy. In some cases, it's become a good strategy if the partnership being given to the one investor and another one thinking more core business.
Can I just add to that as well?
Three more questions.
So let me just add to that. When we think of FDI, we think of greenfield, but actually the joint, and we even when it's non-OECD, we think of joint venture. But actually, the biggest investments on the planet are generally mergers and acquisitions. If you look at the UNCTAD reports, all the big investments that happen across the OECD are mergers and acquisitions. So these are just normal company transactions that take place in most developed economies.
I will give you that chance.
السلام عليكم. ناصر الفالح شركة إدكو تطوير البيئة. We all know that GDP is the fundamental indicator. I need your perception or KPMG perception regarding satisfaction of the growth on all sector in 2018, 2019, please. I believe you have this data. You should be.
So what do you mean in terms of the importance of oil?
No, growth in all sector. I mean in Jubail, refractory,
This, do you have that data?
So,
all factories, all.
yeah. So the study was done in 14 and 15. So I can tell you what I see on the ground. I can speak on that.
No, you see in ground or you have database?
No, we
Data
don't
information.
So Jubail, we don't have the data for
Okay,
it.
kingdom.
Yeah. So
Please.
kingdom level, we see that the government has already identified under NIDLIB document, I'm sure you have seen. We are already in discussion with them on different topics. So they have identified 6 to 8 sectors. The key ones are military, automotive, healthcare, which includes pharma and medical devices, mining, energy. So these are the 5 to 6 key sectors where NIDLIB, and logistics by the way, which is an enabler. So these 7 sectors NIDLIB is looking at, and some of the mandates have already been cascaded to the industrial cities. So we work with Royal Commission, we work with Modon. So we see a lot of development happening on pharma side, generic drugs. You're saying the tangible numbers. But again, if you recall one of the slides I showed you that we are in the policy stage right now. So government is designing incentive packages for pharma, medical devices, energy, military. And once these regulations and policies are in place, the next step is to attract investment. And then you will see growth happening on the ground. So I think we are still at least 3 to 4 years away from seeing something very tangible happening on the ground. So you have some examples of some hospitals or healthcare industries opening up. We work a lot on the West Coast. We see pharma industries, vaccination, plasma, generic drugs. So because we are the, in a way, gatekeepers, so people come to us to comment on the sectors, and we have been approached on, the most important one is pharma, vaccines, plasma, medical devices. The second important one is energy, where we are approached a lot. The third important one I will say is logistics. A lot of discussions, we are engaged on the logistics park, warehousing, fulfillment centers. So these key areas, already development is happening as we are talking, but it will take 2 to 3 years at least to see real development on the ground. So this is.
I think partly I'm getting from your question is that oil still remains dominant and the other sectors are making a small contribution. Is that what you're really saying? Because if that's the case, the way I would look at it is, I'm going to use a completely tangential example here. People asked me a few months ago, India's growing at 8%, China's growing at 4%. Surely India's contribution to world growth is amazing. I said, well, no, because China's 5 times bigger. So India has to grow by 5 times more just to make the same contribution. That is, you can take that as a failure or a weakness. The difference is that the oil story has been so successful that it's going to take time because the stock, a 1% change in 70% of GDP is still a bigger contribution than a 10% change in a 4% change in the other 30%. So if you think about it like that, the contribution to growth will take time to change because the stock of the oil economy is very large. So you can see that as a success. Oil has very much made this economy, but it will take time to adjust. That's just a fact because of the contribution versus the stock.
Kil, if I can add, I think his perspective was, and this is my understanding, that we see a lot of these things being said, being announced, but what is the real development happening on the ground? I think that was the...
I will answer part of his question. That number of total initiatives from that under the responsibility from Royal Commission and being given from NIDLIB total initiative for Royal Commission, it's 21 initiative, which represent 7% from total NIDLIB initiative. This initiative, which is under the responsibility of Royal Commission to be implemented, it's need a value of money injected 16 billion Saudi riyal, which represent 8% from the total NIDLIB initiative program, which means that there are a growth in the industries in specific sectors, either in Jubail Industrial City or Ras Al Khair Industrial Minerals. One of these initiatives is to work in the Blaskin Park, to develop it to be served in a different or a new business model through providing shared services through third partner or investor to the main investor to reduce the capex, which lead to have more competitiveness, more attractiveness, and the investment attractiveness index become more than it's keeping the investor to build everything by himself. And we are introducing in partnership with our stakeholders to introduce the hydrogen grid, the BOEO grid, railway, waste management, chilled water, compressed air, other common shared services such as the admin building, the canteen, the workshop. All these gonna to lead to attract more investment. In a value-wise, as you would like to know, because I know it's linked to your business. Today, I didn't have it in my hand, but I'm 100% sure we have a target to reach to it for such a figure or number of investment and capital investment. This is in Jubail. If we look to Ras Al Khair, the growth of industry, it's clearly appear there because a new sector being introduced, which is shipbuilding or King Salman offshore cluster for shipbuilding yard and the platform and the rig units. These new sectors link to a requirement of a huge investment in the steel mill plate, which we are in negotiation now with international company to start doing this project, which will serve the shipbuilding sector. Keeping in continuous of building the value chain that we, within the kingdom direction now, we would like to maximize the products that produce within our industry, not to be exported in a low value and return back to us with a high value. Example, Tabish mentioned aluminium. We now developing a strategy with Ma'aden, how we maximize the use of our resource to be further downstreams. Generally, I could say, I agree with you and I apologize of not giving you a tangible figure, but the growth is in the horizon, appear in the horizon. So this is what I can conclude for you. Thank you.
Thank
Please.
you, Abdul. No, we're going to, sorry.
Hello.
Next.
Good morning, everybody. Myself, Ombir Singh from Maden. My question is very basic in here, related to the presentation in here. Say we were talking about the investment from the government or Royal Commission, and the return is GDP, the employment they are creating, and so on. So my question is, how much GDP you target per unit investment in infrastructure from Royal Commission? Means how many times GDP per year?
So it's a very good question. We have to look at that number because we know the stock value of total investment being made in Jubail, but we want to have more tangible numbers for 3-4 years before we make that number public. So it would need some time before we announce such a number.
Okay, from not from here, maybe from any benchmark you can say, like Singapore you were talking about, anything, any number.
So a multiplier of at least 2.
Okay.
So if you have an investment of $80 billion, you need to have $150 to $160 billion of GDP value add every year over a long period of time.
Right.
And this includes direct, indirect, induced, overall impact on the economy.
Okay, so we have talked about in here direct GDP calculation formula. So will you give us the formula for induced and indirect also?
So it's very complicated, but for Jubail you will see that number.
Okay.
You will see, I think we don't have that in the, do we have that in the? So I can verbally tell you that number, what is the total number?
Yeah, we can share that with you. It's significant. I mean, Jubail does buy inputs from the rest of the KSA. It does stimulate economic growth in the rest of the KSA. Overall, I think if you include indirect and induced, it's about 4.2% of GDP, the contribution of Jubail, and not just the 2.6. So it is a very substantial benefit to the rest of the nation, what we do here.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to move around the table, sorry.
Abdulhalis Haymu, Saudi Chevron Phillips. My question is, in the case of Singapore, how much services make up of the total economy versus manufacturing? And how did they arrive at the right mix of manufacturing versus services?
They followed quite a boring East Asia story, which was basically 70% manufacturing. Actually, Singapore has no agriculture to speak of, so it was a very standard story, 10% agriculture, 70% manufacturing, 20% services. They did the standard classic development story, which actually doesn't apply to a lot of other countries I've noticed, but Singapore reversed that, and that's meant to happen. You start off in manufacturing and pretty much end up at 70% of GDP being services. That is the standard development phase that you saw in the West, and you saw it in Singapore. They did it much more quickly. And I'll give you actually a different example of the UK. The big debate for 30 years has been the collapse of manufacturing in the UK. The Tory government in the 80s destroyed manufacturing, but actually it's remained at about 20% for the last 40 years. It's just every European economy will find some way to have about 20% GDP growth coming from manufacturing. All they've done is moved up the value added, and Singapore is exactly the same as any other country. So they just reversed manufacturing with services.
Thank you.
Perfect. One more question before the break? Oh, maybe two, depends.
Assalamu alaikum, good morning. My name is Sultan Sheikh from SABIC. Just in continuation to our colleague in Chevron. Now, looking at the GDP of Jubail as a city, it talk about 2.5%. We need to understand what is the percentage related to the services that, based on the results of the 2015 and what we are looking at the 21 initiative that from NERLIB down the road, how much targeted or how many % targeted Jubail GDP to be in the services sector?
Tavish, you can comment on what the figure is now, and maybe Abdullah on where we want to go.
So today as we talk, or maybe for 15, it's almost, I think 90% plus is industrial and industrial sector, around 90%. Services will not be more than 10% of Jubail's economy. Yeah. Target, we need to do that math. We haven't done that. But just to add on to what Kil said, it's not necessary that Jubail should also become a 70% services, because this is something national which he was talking about. Singapore is a city country. So, but it's okay if Jubail continues to be a manufacturing magnet with some other sectors growing, like maybe financial services, maybe tourism, and rest of the key factors can remain in Riyadh or Jeddah on the services.
Thank you for your comment, which you raised it, and it will be taken in consideration for. Again, thank you for your comments that you raised it, and it will be, since we start this exercise 2014 and 2015, and now we are calculating the GDP FDI for 16, 17, 18, it will be taken in consideration because we believe it's an important sector to be linked to our industries. Otherwise, most of the services will be still coming from outside. It's okay to come from outside Jubail, but we don't want it to come from outside of the kingdom. But it will be taken in consideration with your support of providing us the information to complete the 16, 17, 18 exercise. I'm sure we will come with a huge different result and target and direction of the expected required to be taken in development from Royal Commission and an expansion of the investment from you as a private sector. Thank you.
One thing Jubail does have in place, in the city center, we're planning 450,000 square meters of office space. Those will be business and financial service jobs, those will be industrial service jobs, EPC engineering, all sorts of stuff that we don't have here now. The SABIC building is a wonderful first start, and hopefully there'll be many more. But we're already shifting towards a service economy, at least service linked to our petrochemical industry, and there's no reason why we cannot have a lot more well-paid service jobs here in Jubail. One last question.
Can I just add something to that? You know, if you're looking at Singapore, one part is actually industrial, one part is financial, then there's a central business district, then they literally have everything zoned perfectly as to where every activity will take place. But within that context, there are different kinds of services. There's going to be the services which is leveraging what manufacturers need, like trade, financing, and everything else that's right now should be done here, as was mentioned, but is often done from abroad because the facilities aren't here. Then you've got the general services, the people who serve you in a shop. That's a different kind of services altogether. Then you've got pure financial services as in itself an industry. So, you know, we've got to actually see which one is best placed to be here. It's not just, let's have some banks here because that's the services definition. Let's have the banks that help you with trade financing here and the services in education and everything else.
Perfect. Just one final question before we break.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good morning, gentlemen. This is Abdullah Al-Aliani from Royal Commission at Yamba. Actually, based on 2018 statistics coming from GA Stat, saying that it's around 99.8 of our enterprises in Saudi Arabia is considered to be small and medium enterprises and tiny enterprises. And it's contribute by 21% in our GDP in the kingdom. I don't want to jump to the conclusion or your outcomes, but did we include it in our study, in this study? What is the impact of the small and medium enterprises?
Yeah, the KPMG did survey all our smaller enterprises in light and support, and Tavish, maybe you can talk. And in fact, the GDP covers everything.
Yeah. So the numbers are there. The contribution is small. The reason is, so Kingdom has a strategy where the mega investment go to Jubail or Royal Commission, Jubail or Yanbu, and the small, medium scale investment go to modern cities. So this is the Kingdom strategy. So the numbers for Jubail will always be different from the national numbers. So Jubail will have a higher proportion of massive investment GDP contribution versus small, medium scale contribution. For now, yes, we want to change it. We want to have, we have a light and support cluster. We are trying to promote that. But again, the national strategy is Jubail is going to be the magnet of large investments, and small, medium scale manufacturing especially will go to Modern.
Just let me update this information. We didn't ignore SME industries in our cities, not only in Jubail or Ras Al Khair, in all Royal Commission cities. Now it's moving with the same direction of the Kingdom of encouraging having more SMEs, but we are focusing on integration, as I mentioned, in the value chain of utilizing and maximizing the benefit from the products that produce within the primary or mega industries to be further for downstream industries, such as we are focusing in the converter, end use, consumable products, focusing in highly specialty chemicals, which classified as a small or M, but it add more adding value to the technology, creating more job, highly talent job creation. So now we are in a direction of focusing in more SME. That's why if you look to the structure of the new structure of Royal Commission, they introduce a unit for SME industries to be increased and to be taken more care, because we believe SME internationally, it has a major contribution to the economy, to the GDP, to the job creation. I agree with you 100%, and Tabish, what he mentioned, yes, since the 70s up to 2011, we are focusing in the mega industries of attracting such huge petrochemical industries. But the Kingdom strategy now always focusing and linking these new mega industries with further downstream industries. It's not a confidential. The latest investment being announced in Jubail, it's Amiral, which is Satur 2. Now we are in negotiation with them to have a further downstream industries relying in their output, and with this investment, it will create more new sectors that it will serve and localize many industries, such as pharmaceutical, paints, construction sectors, spare parts, additives, the new plastic engineering resins, the compounding, the master batches, all these sectors to be localized, because we believe from our analysis of the import and export statistical information, a lot of these chemicals or products are imported, while it could be manufactured. And thank you also for our partners. They have a lot of initiatives. SABIC, they have Nusanid for localization. Aramco, they have Iktifa, and other focusing on how we support the SME industries, not only just giving them a feedstock. No, I know Nusanid, it's an initiative for local content, supporting them financially, technically, sometimes joint venture or partnership, which means now it's become a mandatory to consider the SME as a major block for our economic contribution.
Perfect. Let's take a break. There's another Q&A session before lunch. I'm sure we'll jump back in, and we'll reconvene in about 14 minutes. So just start 5 minutes late. But perfect.
So we start 10:50, Steve. So
15
exactly
minutes past 10:50 instead of 10:45.
Yeah. Start with 15 minutes. I think we should start.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, I think we'll start, and also we can give you a copy of the presentation. So if you see a number there that you're interested in, you will get the presentation. Just leave your business card with us at the front, and we'll make sure you get a copy of the presentation. Tabish, if you could continue. We're just, maybe we'll squeeze the presentations just a little bit, so we've still got the good 15 minutes for question and answers, so you've got a chance to give questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Welcome, gentlemen. We are late by almost 16 minutes. We'll try to squeeze. We want to finish before Dhuhr. Dhuhr is 11:44, so we have to make up for the lost time. Excellent. So I'll just quickly give you an update how we conduct the study. So this is, again, the size is the representation of the economic contribution. Not exactly, and this is for 2016, 17, might be applicable today also. The maximum contribution comes from the primary industries. We send them the surveys, we also go and try to meet them. Secondary industries, they get a survey, and we go and meet them also to explain, to also push them and convince them why these numbers are important. Light and support, we send them the survey. and they fill it. We get onto the calls with them to ensure that the numbers are shared. So this is the contribution from the industry. On the right side, you see the other contribution will come from government spending and the residential commercial sector. For these activities, Royal Commission, we get the direct data, what is the salary paid, how many people they have working for the schools, people working in the hospitals, and working for Royal Commission. For residential commercial, we use data shared by GasStat, and we use typical multipliers for those sectors. So like how many commercial entities are there, restaurants, hotels, these numbers we get from GasStat. Moving to the next slide, please. Yeah. So what sort of information we require? We call it data vault. We need the company information, the sector company is operating in, the types of products produced, employee information, and the ownership structure. We need the asset information, what are the fixed assets you have on the ground. This is largely for FDI purpose. We need the revenue details. Most important thing, we need it at the product level. Because without product level information, we cannot complete the linkages of the value chain. It's very important that we get the data at the product level. Products and services you procure, this also we need at the product or the service level. So what is the typical cost of logistics? What is the typical cost of maintenance charge if you have it outsourced? What is the typical outflow of cash you pay to that company? What is the proportion of your goods being exported, and of the services or products which you buy, what is the proportion of that being imported? Again, this is for the linkages purposes. Your import is a potential opportunity to localize, where we can bring your service provider to the city or to the country, and your excess capacity is an opportunity where we can bring a buyer for you. Foreign investment is important to understand the FDI flowing to the country, to Jubail, and also the stock value. So we want to understand whether it's an interesting opportunity for the foreign investors or not, Jubail as a city. Different stages of the project we are going to kickstart for the remaining years. The first step is we prepare the survey. It's uploaded online. Everyone gets a link. We collect the data. In many cases, you will get a request from Royal Commission, where Royal Commission employees will come and explain it to you. Because now it is expected that Royal Commission will conduct these surveys themselves. KPMG will only give them the background support. So we believe in knowledge transfer. I think the team is skilled enough to do it on their own. The next stage is data validation. We validate the numbers. We all are humans, we can make mistakes. In some places a 0 can be extra or a 0 can be less, but it impacts the numbers. So we compare it with the previous numbers. We have some benchmarks, and then we go back to the companies and we request them to correct the data or give us the correct data. Once all these things are done, we have put them in a box. Areas where we need intense collaboration with the industry. We calculate, analyze, and then we finalize the numbers and share the report. We want to institutionalize that at the end of every project you will get the results again at the anonymized level. So you will not know what is the contribution of each company, but at the sector level you will have the results which you can use for your own assessment. 3 stages where your support is required. Number 1, data collection. Please ensure that the numbers are right. If it is possible, this is not mandatory, but we'll appreciate if you can provide us the financial statements also. Not mandatory, but we'll appreciate because it ensures that the numbers are right. So we can check and validate ourselves. Timeline is important. Delay from your side delays the whole process. When we reach out to you for the correction of the numbers, we'll request and appreciate if you can cooperate with the team. If there is any additional information which can help us in validating the numbers, please do that. Some companies have, for the product level information, you have management accounts. If you want to share your management accounts, we'll appreciate that. Again, few things are not mandatory, they're good to have. few things are required to estimate the right numbers. For data correction, once we reach out to you that these numbers are not in line, we'll request if you can correct the numbers. And it's important that the numbers we are aligned on before we use it for further analysis. That's it. So we have already covered 10 minutes. Most important thing, the result snapshot. First thing first, what we did as part of the project, we collaborated with Aramco. So Aramco does a lot of regional economic analysis, and they have a very strong economics team. So what KPMG did, KPMG
Must be one of the mics.
One of the mics. If everyone can please switch off their mics. Yeah, thank you. So what KPMG did, KPMG worked with Aramco to develop the industrial classification which can be used in Jubail. This is customized for Jubail Industrial and Ras Al Khair Industrial City. This is worked along with Aramco. So you see that that's the upstream and that's the downstream. Starting from the raw material, looking at 3 key sectors, oil and gas, metals, minerals, moving towards the downstream, refineries, either for oil and gas, or smelters, or ore refining, moving further upstreams, producing the basic chemicals, downstream, some specialized chemicals, getting into finished products, and then the industrial services, which is more of a enabler than a product. So you will see this classification in next slide. So I think when you will see the presentation, you will understand how it is being done. So we believe that every product being produced in Jubail will find some space here. And we have looked at almost every product. This is very detailed. We have more backing to define sub-products and sub-classifications. Please.
Actually, I'm missing a very important thing over here. This is ethane. Ethane you are missing totally because that is the basis of all the raw material, all the product which is getting into the.
So which is here?
No, natural gas is ethane is one of the components, but it is actually if you see the refined product, ethane is.
We can add, no problem. So this. Okay, so we'll add that, no problem. No problem.
Methane is there definitely.
Yeah, so we'll add ethane also.
Is the most important.
Agreed. No, so this is not comprehensive. This is non-exhaustive to give you a feeler what we can do, Salim. Let's make a note. We send them the Excel also, which covers almost every product. So you will see ethane, propane, everything in that list. So to put everything on one slide, this is non-exhaustive. But these categories, you can sense that it will come, like out of my head, I can say ethane will come here. Propane will also come here. So under the same classification, within raw material refined products, we have 14 companies employing around 6,000 people. In the upstream, downstream chemicals category, we have around 42 companies, largely some of them are in primary, some of them are in secondary, employing around 33,000 people. Finished good, industrial services, around 240 companies, employing around 70,000 people. So it also shows why services are so labor intensive. So you can see that almost half of the people are employed in the services sector. In terms of labor productivity, so labor productivity is nothing but the value add of that company divided by the number of people working for that company. So this is very typical. So you can see a spike in upstream chemicals. The reason you have the spike is feedstock advantage. These are 15 numbers. If the feedstock prices go up, this number might change. So again, it's almost 6.8 million. Salim, have you put the, so all numbers are in 1,000. So this is 6.8 million reals per employee. And as you move downstream, the value add goes down per employee, but because it is more labor intensive. That's the reason. And this is the most capital intensive vertical, and that's why the value add per employee is higher, but it is not labor intensive. Labor intensive are industrial services or finished goods.
This compares very well to our competitors. We're just as productive here in Jubail as Singapore or Houston when we have a chemical plant or a petrochemical complex.
So picking Steve's point, we also compared Jubail with Jurong Island, which is a similar petrochemical park, but very small. And Shanghai has an industrial complex for petrochemicals. You can see that in terms of labor productivity, Saudi is better than Singapore and China. In terms of employee, similar number of employees as in Shanghai, but again the productivity is higher because of cheap, the feedstock advantage, power costs are cheaper, the infrastructure is world class. If you look at the contribution, we have only considered the industrial contribution, it doesn't include commercial residential. It's 71.3 billion riyals for 2015. As a contribution to the nation, this is 3% of the economy. So it also shows how critical Jubail is to the economy versus Jurong or Shanghai. I know that they are bigger economies also. China specifically. Singapore is half our size. But the most important thing is that how critical Jubail and Ras Al Khair are to the economy. 2015, everywhere 2015. So, yeah. Exact numbers, most important message is while the economy shrinked, the GDP of Jubail increased. This is the most important message. So Jubail was in a way driver of positive contribution to the economy. The economy of Jubail grew by 2.8%, 14 versus 15, while the economy of the country decreased by 13%. This was the time when the prices dropped. Percentage of the kingdom's GDP, it was 2.6% in 14, it increased to 3% in 15. As a percentage of non-oil revenue, we know that almost 40% of the GDP is oil. We were 4.5%, and this decreased to 4.2%. The reason was that the other sectors were performing better compared to petrochemical. So we covered FDI. So these are the national numbers. So the stock value of the foreign investment in the kingdom increased by 30 billion, 14 versus 15. It is 840 billion riyals. The kingdom's contribution to the stock value of FDI is 13%. Within the kingdom, the average ownership stock of the companies is around 25%. So two key numbers, 25% is the average stock value of FDI, and Jubail contributes 13% to the national FDI value. So these numbers are very big. If you compare it with the GDP contribution, this number is almost 3 to 4 times of GDP in the absolute sense. Sorry, double the size of GDP, sorry.
Yeah.
Excellent. We covered. We have good 20-25 minutes to have Q&A.
So we're nearly exactly on time. We're as good as a German car maker right now.
Yeah. I will just tell them some of the issues we face, and then it's linked to the Q&A.
Sure.
We always request in the, I know, so apologies for the quality of the image. We ask for the product level information. Most companies don't fill it. They fill one number, which doesn't help in building the linkages and understanding which direction we should grow. So we'll request if you can fill information at the product level. We need product level information. We need the breakup of the purchase of products or services you are doing and from where you are buying. If you can share the financial statements, it can help us in correcting. Again, it is not mandatory. Some of the frequently asked questions. Number one, Will this data be shared with Zakat, VAT authorities? Answer is no. The objective is completely different. This is for building the value chain map of Jubail and making policy decisions on that. It has nothing to do with VAT or Zakat. Would Royal Commission or any consultant like us, how will they ensure that the data is confidential? We sign an NDA with Royal Commission. The same NDA is extended to all the companies, all the investors. It's written in the NDA, and we have the liability clause there. So we'll be liable for the breach of data confidentiality. What is the usual time to fill in the survey? So as per our assessment, it will take 2 to 3 hours to fill the survey. We give 2 months of time frame to fill the survey. In these 2 months, we go and meet people, we conduct interviews, we call them. There's any query, we have a phone line where people can call and ask the questions. So 2 months, we believe, is a very reasonable time to spend because it just requires 2 to 3 hours. Any other potential question?
Perfect. Yeah.
Please.
So this is regarding to the filling of the survey. I work in Ma'aden, and Ma'aden phosphate particularly, it has 2 sections. One is there in Jubail Royal Commission area, is in Russell Khair. Other one is in there Wal Samal or in Al Jaramid. So how to split that data in between? Because financial statement is for the company, not for the Russell Khair city or Modon in Wal Samal or in Al Jaramid. It will be for a complete company, but for the Royal Commission data, means for this particular form, I need to split the profitability or whatever the financials for that company and this location and that location. So how do you treat the intermediate transfer from that location to this location?
So for us, the definition of the company is the commercial registration. If both these companies have the same commercial registration, you don't prepare different financials, yes, then you have to fill one survey. Within the survey, we will appreciate if you can give the product level information.
No, product level information of the final product or the intermediate as well.
Final product.
Okay.
Final product.
So that we do actually. Normally we provide that. But my question is, say, one of the companies having most of the operations in Russell Khair, other company most of the operations in Wal Samal city. So means I'm not very sure, but the final product is produced in Russell Khair.
So then the value is the value is captured in Jubail. So what you are saying, it's the same commercial registration with 2 branches.
Yes.
And that the Wadi Shumal branch
supplies
intermediate
product to this location.
And you don't qualify that as an input factor.
It transferred at cost. It's
so because in my view, this is a transfer pricing question. So at what price do you transfer raw material from the Wadi Shumal company to the Russell Khair company?
So you mean to say I should fix a transfer price and then split the financials?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is what I meant.
Good.
Yeah, and also the financial statements are helpful, but they're not a substitute for enterprise level data because that's not exactly always in the financial statement. So that's very much appreciated, and it's more or less a validation check for KPMG and ourselves. It's not a substitute for the survey itself.
Yeah.
Next question.
Please.
One concern, I think I speak about myself, but I think others also may have that concern. Unanimousness of the data. How is the data going to be kept unanimous? So we share sensitive information, confidential information, and I think you addressed that in anticipated question. That is one concern. I would like to be at least assured of this issue. The second thing is the feedback. Are we going to receive a feedback from this survey or this study? Because we have contributed to the data in the previous surveys, but we have not seen the outcome. And I think this workshop is one side to engage and address this concern. I think it is very important if we can have that feedback.
Excellent.
One other issue is, I think we heard about shared services. We in support industries have need for shared services, and the survey is more into financial metrics, not into logistical needs other needs that the small, medium-sized industries may require. So how is that going to be addressed in this type of activity?
Good.
Yeah,
So,
with
so there are three
confidentiality.
questions. The first question is how the data will be kept anonymous and confidential. The second question was how will you get access to the results and the feedback from Royal Commission? And the third question was how will Royal Commission help you in getting the shared services near your sites? So I'll help on 1 and 2, and I'll leave 3 for Royal Commission and Steve. So on point number 1, so KPMG is one of the world's largest auditors in the world. So maybe we will be second largest in Saudi. Globally, we are maybe second or third. So we are used to accessing and preserving and ensuring that the financial data is preserved. So this is the first proof we have our reputation as KPMG. We are known for preserving financial data. Second thing, we already have the confidentiality letters and clauses in place. Number 3, at no place KPMG will give data at the company level. So the data what Royal Commission has is only at the sector level and the scheme we define. So the data they have, even they don't have your data, by the way. So once we hand over the portal to them, yes, then they will have it. But right now, the access they have is only at the aggregated sector level data. They don't have company level data right now. Second question was on the feedback. So my belief is that such a workshop will be institutionalized. You will have such workshop more regularly. Every year I will assume. And we also propose that at the closure of every project every year, you should receive a small document which should summarize the results. So these will be 2 touch points after the project. During the project, you will have a phone number to call, and our team or Royal Commission's team will come and they will explain. So you will have 3 touch points during the project 1. After the project, you should receive a small report, and there should be a workshop like this. Question number 3, I'll leave for Steve. The shared services.
Yes, I mean, well, as you know, I mean, we've talked about it previously in some of the Q&As. We're expanding the shared services. It's targeted. We are trying, I mean, we've mentioned feedstock advantage, and Jubail was built on feedstock advantage, but you can't last forever on feedstock advantage. You've got to reduce each cost one by one, no matter how small the percentage contribution. If you don't bring them all down to your competitors' level, you're either stuck giving a gigantic feedstock advantage and losing money, and you don't compete. And one of the reasons why we are so interested in something like the auto sector, it pushes us. It's a very, very tight margin business. It relies on excellent logistics. It just has to be in very fast and out very fast. And usually these big OEMs aren't interested in JVs. They either come in as a wholly foreign-owned entity or they don't come. And that is also pushing us to look at all the shared services that support industry and benchmark it against what would be good for some of the world's most advanced and fastest sectors like the auto. So we're coming up to the level of being able to produce an auto and be competitive. And actually that benefits the chemical industry, which might not be quite as sensitive, but nevertheless benefits from all these other shared services that come in with some of the newer industries that we're bringing, which actually are quite more demanding on some of the shared services. But it's a big strategy to expand the shared services. We feel we're underdeveloped in shared services. We benchmark ourselves against Singapore, Antwerp, and others, and they have more shared services than what we have. And clearly there's room to go. What's the point in being the world's largest by volume chemical cluster if we don't also have the world's largest shared service cluster to feed that? We should be number 1 in both, not just in the first. And that's certainly one of the aims.
So just to summarize the answer to his question, so do we have any mechanism to capture these concerns? I think there's an annual and quarterly industrial survey. Do we capture or can we capture such queries from the investors?
I mean, in some ways, it's an open question. I mean, what we wanted to do with this feedback was to give you more than raw numbers. We could have emailed you the raw numbers. And as mentioned, it has to be aggregated up. You'll never see your company in the numbers. And that's a little bit quick, and it could be a little bit dull. What we're trying to do is give here in this workshop a little bit of the numbers, but plus why we're using it, how we're going to use it. And what you'll get every year in something like this is some regular feedback on how the strategy is evolving and how we plug the numbers into the strategy. As I mentioned, we're going to be obliged to do cost-benefit analysis in all our infrastructure. All these numbers are going to feed into that, and obviously we're seeing success in some of the future directions of our strategy, and hopefully we'll be able to feed that back to you regularly. I don't know if a show of hands, I mean, do you like a mixed seminar, which is not just technical, not just about the numbers or how to do the GDP, but a little bit of results, a little bit of strategy as well? Is that what works for you? Do you want it more technical or more strategic? More strategic. So not just raw numbers of GDP, FDI results, but something like this where you're getting a little bit of why we're using it and as we progress through policy achievements and opportunities, that you get that feedback in real time. Okay, we'll keep that in mind.
Any other question on the survey or any other question, please?
Okay. As far as I see from this study, you're trying to come up with targeted sector. Just want to understand, is the NIS, National Industrial Strategy, is taken in consideration in this study?
So just to correct you, thank you for the question. So this study was to come up with a number. NIS strategy has been considered at the Royal Commission level. So Royal Commission is currently revising their strategy, or it's rather top-down, Vision 2030, NIS and Royal Commission. So all the factors or sectors or subsectors identified in NIS are being considered in the Royal Commission strategy. So the answer is yes.
Tabish, thank you for your question. All NIS sectors being targeted and related to Royal Commission industrial model, it's being considered, either from oil gas based industries and further downstream value chain, or mineral industries. As you know, the National Industrial Cluster, they are adopting 5 or 6 sectors, such as the chemical, the plastic, specialty chemicals, the pharma, the automotive, the other metal industries. So whatever that matching our industrial business model or industrial master plan, it's been in consideration.
Perfect. One more question before we break for lunch, or is everybody's keen for prayer and lunch? Okay, I think we'll break here. It was a good guidance. Maybe next time we'll even do more strategy and bring in some of the results from other studies, not just the GDP study. And look forward to seeing you all next year. We'll break for lunch now. But if you...
My colleague, Mr. Mohammed, he would like to consider in the coming GDP FDI exercise the strategy and direction of the business model, either and the shared services, either that support their industries or should be considered by Royal Commission. This is need to be included in our assignment. Also taking their feedback, and at the end we have to develop a white paper from the comprehensive study to be distributed or send it to all of them as appreciation of their cooperation of providing us the information. So this is one of their requirements.
Point taken. Thank you. We'll be done.
Perfect. Well, let's break there, and thank you ever so much for coming.
So Steve, on the timing, so So we break for Salah?
Break for prayer. Prayer is just about to come up, and then lunch immediately after that.
No. So then we proceed. You want to invite everyone for lunch?
Yeah, I think in conclusion, I would like to thank everybody for your valuable time of being with us. But your continuous support is very important to able to succeed to our target of completing the GDP FDI exercise for 2016, 17, 18. And I could assure you that whenever we complete these indicators, we will provide you a white paper as appreciation from Royal Commission of your support. Thank you again, and you are most welcome for our dinner or lunch. I'm just kidding. Huh? So after prayer time, we will, inshallah, see you in dining room. And again, thank you very much. And the closing message, without your support, we will not be able to reach to these indicators. So your cooperation, it's not an essential only, it's the factor of our succeed. Thank you.